Hi there, my name is Will, and today I'm going to walk you through how you can generate a bunch of different data from your Python code directly inside of Kestra. Now, when you're running your code inside of Kestra, it can be really useful to be able to generate data from that, whether that's outputs, metrics, logs, or files. I'm going to walk you through how you can do all of those today and connect those to the rest of your workflow. Let's jump into it. Starting things off, I have a very simple workflow here. Now, what we're going to do is just create a simple Python task here that will then enable us to generate data that we can then put into Kestra. Here, I've got a simple Python script, which is just simply going to use the requests library here to get a HTTP request to a URL of our choice, and then it's going to print out the status code from that response. So when I execute this, we'll see that it's going to output that to the logs so that we know that it was successful, but we can't really use that data. And as you can see, we've got status code 200, but we can't do anything with that. We can't now use that in later tasks to maybe check a condition or maybe send that as a notification somewhere. So let's look at how we can generate that as an output of this task, which we can then use in other tasks downstream. We can do that with the Python library provided for Kestra. This has a bunch of useful utilities built into it to help you connect your Python code with Kestra, and one of those is being able to produce outputs. Now, all I need to do is install it using pip install, so I can simply just do it there, and then we're going to import it from the Kestra library. We're specifically going to import the class Kestra. By using that class, we can use the method .outputs here and hand it a dictionary of our data. So here I've got status and I've given it the response.status code. So now if I execute this task, what we'll see is it not only produced the log message, which is helpful for us to see in the logs, but not overly useful for the rest of the workflow. We can now go to outputs, and specifically under vars, we'll see that we've got the status with the value 200. We can now use that in a later task. So let's add a log task in to see that in action. So here, using an expression, I've added outputs.the ID of our task Python .vars, which we can double check by going to the documentation for the Python script task, and we can see that under outputs at the bottom here, that vars is in fact an output. And then we can do .status because we know that's the name of the variable that we have given to Kestra. So if I save this and now execute this, we'll be able to see in the logs quite clearly that once it's executed Python, we can see that value has appeared in our later task thanks to outputs. And we can see that, yeah, again, that output was accessed. Now let's have a look at an example where we've got a little bit more data and we can do more with it. Now here is a similar example, but instead we're using pandas here to ingest a CSV file. We're going to then take the CSV file that pandas has, and we're going to turn it into a dictionary, which we can then send back to Kestra as a JSON. So let's now execute this, and we'll then see with our log task underneath that it will output the entire JSON format. So let's have a look at this in action. So we can see it was successful, and it has outputted this very large JSON here in the logs. Now, this is just an example of where you can use it in a later task, but you might have another task where you need to upload, make a request, and send a JSON body. And here's an example of where you can use Python to generate that for you, and then send it as an output that you can then retrieve using an expression. We can also view this under outputs, so we can see here under Python and vars, we've got a variable called data, and there's another level to it where we can see that there is 99 or 100 different items in here, and we can see all of the different variables inside of those two, just like the dictionary had originally. And so now we can really get into the nitty gritty here with later tasks, and maybe use something like a for each task to be able to loop through these two and then process them even further. So this is a really nice way of where you can use Python here inside of your workflow to manipulate data and then generate an output that you can then use in a later task without having to do everything in Python. You might also want to output things as files. Previously, we were just using variables, but you can also generate files that you can then upload or use in later tasks. Now here's an example I have here that is going to write to a simple txt file, and we use the output files property here to be able to specify what output files we are expecting to see. You can use a few different characters here to be able to kind of catch all cases of maybe any CSV file, but in this example we're explicitly saying we only want one output file, and that is going to be my file.txt. And we can see here we just simply wrote a bit of simple Python here that is just going to write to the file, it's going to just write the string status code with the status code embedded in and then close it. And we can then read that using an expression here by using outputs.python and then .output files. We can then use the square brackets here to get access to that file, and then wrapping it in the read function allows us to then get the contents of the file. So if I now execute this again, you'll see that it will generate the file like we expected. We can actually view it in the outputs tab, but we can also see that it does get the string and outputs to the logs like we expected. We can double check that again here. So we've got no vars this time, but we do have an output file, which I could download, but I can also view it and see the contents of it exactly as I expected. Something else that is a common scenario inside of Kestra is generating metrics. Now, outputs are really useful, but sometimes you want to be able to monitor how long things are taking and maybe count things. And you can do that again with the Python library provided for Kestra. Now, similar to using outputs, we can use .timer, and there's also .count available as well. So you can count up a value and output that to the metrics, but in our scenario, we're going to use a timer. We can do that by getting two different timestamps using performance counter as a method here, and then calculating the difference between them to get the time taken to perform our function. So when I execute this, we'll see that it's going to generate the output we were expecting as an output that we can use. So there's status code 200. I can see that again here in the outputs tab. But now if I go to metrics, I can actually see duration is in here as a time, and I can see the time in here at 2.82 seconds. But you can also output other metrics here too if you'd like to do that. You can also send logs directly to the Kestra logs from your Python code. So that means you can integrate your Python a little bit closer to Kestra and then be able to view those logs and filter by them too. Now, it's worth noting that we have a trace level log inside of Kestra. Python does not support this. So for now, the trace level is not something you can send to from your Python code, but you can set up the logger here. You can set up the logger object here using the Kestra library, and then you can send different levels such as debug, info, warning, error, and critical. Now, it is again worth noting that the critical and the error one will come up in Kestra, both with the error log level, because that is what we have in Kestra, but it does allow you to then be able to fail workflows automatically by using these logs. So here I've got it set so that I can allow failures so that it will not fail before it gets to the end. But let's press execute and have a little look at what this produces in the logs. So as we can see, we've got our debug log here from the Python code. We can also see that we have a warning produced, which was as expected. The critical and the error one have appeared specifically as red error codes. But trace again was not successful here. So if I do select trace, we can see there is no trace one. So do bear that in mind when you're working with this. The benefit here is I can now filter by these different levels very easily, seeing the info, or I want to see what the warning was. This is the warning that Python itself specifically produced, not from the Kestra task. So it gives you a lot of control over how you can produce those logs. So hopefully that gives you a good overview on how you can generate data from your Python code and then access that inside of Kestra. Whether that's an output, a metric, a file, or a log, you can do it all with Kestra. Let us know in the comments below how you're going to integrate Python with Kestra. We'd love to hear how you're using it so we can make the product even better. Remember to join us on Slack where you can discuss with us further.